Rain pours across the palace courtyard. The Alpha King stands cold and furious before the entire court, while guards drag a young woman down the palace steps. She's barefoot, crying, humiliated. Everyone watches. Then the king says, "If she ever returns to my kingdom, she dies." The gates slam behind her, and only after she collapses alone in the forest do we reveal. She's pregnant, but she doesn't know yet. The kingdom of Valdoria feared its king more than death itself. People lowered their eyes when his name was spoken. Mothers silenced crying children with whispers about the Alpha King. Soldiers straightened the moment his shadow crossed palace halls. Even the nobles, wealthy men who controlled entire territories, became nervous whenever Kale entered a room. Because Kale did not rule with kindness. He ruled with control. Absolute control. And for 5 years, no one had ever seen the Alpha King lose it. Until Lyra. The strange thing was, she never meant to matter to him at all. At sunrise, she was invisible. Just another human servant carrying linens through endless palace corridors while nobles walked past her as if she didn't exist. Most people barely remembered her name. She kept her head down, spoke softly, worked harder than anyone else in the castle. But the servants loved her. Not loudly, not openly. That would have been dangerous. Still, they noticed the small things. The way she secretly brought food to exhausted kitchen workers after midnight. The way she sat with injured stable boys while everyone else ignored them. The way even frightened palace children stopped crying whenever she smiled at them. Lyra carried warmth into a castle built on fear. And somehow, the Alpha King noticed. It started with tiny moments. Moments no one else saw. One winter night, Lyra stayed late polishing silver trays inside the empty dining hall while snow hammered against the tall glass windows. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, but she kept working silently beneath candlelight. Then suddenly, a chair scraped behind her. Lyra froze. Every servant in the kingdom knew that sound. The Alpha King. She immediately lowered her eyes. My king. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that made people panic. Kale stood near the doorway, wearing black ceremonial robes lined with silver fur. Rainwater still dripped from his shoulders. He must have just returned from battle council meetings. But he didn't leave. Instead, his gaze settled on her trembling hands. "You're still working?" he asked quietly. Lyra swallowed hard. "The West Wing banquet starts tomorrow." Another long silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. Kale stepped forward, removed his gloves slowly, and placed them beside her on the table. Lyra stared at them in confusion. "My king, you can barely feel your fingers," he said flatly. "Wear them." Her breath caught instantly, because rulers like Kale did not notice servant girls. They certainly didn't care if they were cold. But before she could answer, he turned away again, as if the moment had never happened. And that was how it always began. Small moments, hidden moments, dangerous moments. Weeks passed, then months. And somehow the coldest man in the kingdom kept finding reasons to appear wherever Lyra was. In the library, in the gardens, outside the kitchens late at night. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Until one evening when she found him standing alone on the palace balcony, overlooking the city below. Torches flickered across Valdoria like scattered stars beneath the dark mountains. Kale didn't look at her when he spoke. "Do you know what they say about me in the lower districts?" Lyra hesitated carefully. "Most people fear you, my king." A humorless smile touched his lips. "They should." The wind howled between them. Lyra should have left then. Every instinct told her to leave. But instead, she stepped closer to the balcony railing beside him. And for the first time, she truly looked at him. Not the king. Not the Alpha everyone feared. Just the man beneath it all. He looked exhausted. Lonely. Like someone carrying the weight of an entire kingdom alone. "You protect them," she said softly. Kale finally turned toward her, his silver eyes narrowed slightly. "Even when they hate you for it." For a second, something shifted in the air between them. Something neither of them wanted to name. And that terrified her most of all. Because Lyra already knew what happened to girls who got too close to powerful men. Especially kings. But Kale kept pulling her closer anyway. Late-night conversations turned into secret walks through empty palace corridors. Secret walks became stolen touches. A hand against her waist, his fingers brushing hers. Moments that lasted too long. Moments that made her heart race every time footsteps approached nearby. And still no one knew. Or at least that's what they thought. Because inside royal courts, secrets never stayed buried for long. Especially not from Lady Selene. Selene was beautiful in the cruelest possible way. Sharp eyes, perfect posture, a smile that never reached her eyes. Daughter of the Northern Alliance leader. Future queen of Valdoria, according to everyone except Kale himself. 4 months, the court had pressured the Alpha King into marrying her. The alliance would strengthen the kingdom, secure military borders, prevent rebellion. It was the logical choice, and Kale hated every second of it. You cannot avoid this forever, Selene told him one evening during council gathering. Nobles filled the massive chamber while servants poured wine quietly around them. Kale sat lazily across the throne, expression unreadable. I already am, he replied coldly. Several councilmen shifted nervously. Selene's smile tightened. The people need stability. The people need obedience, Kale corrected. The room immediately fell silent. No one challenged him after that. No one except Selene. And that was when her eyes drifted across the chamber, landing directly on Lyra. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because women like Selene noticed everything. Especially weakness. Especially rivals. From that moment on, the palace changed. Whispers followed Lyra through hallways. Servants suddenly stopped speaking when she entered rooms. Royal guards watched her longer than before. And Kale noticed it too. One night, he cornered her quietly near the east corridor after midnight. What happened today? He asked sharply. Lyra looked away. Nothing. Don't lie to me. The intensity in his voice made her chest tighten. She hesitated before answering. They already think I'm a monster. And somehow, that hurt her even more. But while Lyra feared gossip, Selene was already planning something much worse. Because humiliation wasn't enough anymore. She wanted Lyra gone permanently. It happened 3 nights later. The palace erupted into chaos just before dawn. Guards stormed through servant quarters. Council members shouted through corridors. Someone had attempted to poison the Alpha King's ceremonial wine before an alliance meeting. And worse, confidential military documents had vanished from the royal archives. The kingdom immediately went into lockdown. No one allowed in. No one allowed out. Fear spread through the palace like wildfire. Lyra woke to screaming outside her chamber door. Then, bang! The door burst open. Royal guards flooded inside. Her breath caught instantly. What's happening? No one answered. One guard grabbed her arms roughly while another overturned her room violently. Drawers crashed onto the floor. Blankets ripped apart. Lyra's panic rose fast. Please, wait! What are you doing? Then suddenly, one of the guards froze. He slowly reached beneath her mattress and pulled out a small silver vial. The poison. Lyra went completely pale. No! Another guard opened her storage chest nearby. Inside were sealed royal documents bearing the king's crest. Stolen state secrets. The room fell silent. Lyra stared at the evidence in horror, because she had never seen any of it before. And deep down, she realized exactly what this meant. Someone had set her up, but outside the chamber doors, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Slow, controlled, terrifying. The Alpha King had arrived, and Lyra suddenly understood one horrifying truth. Everything was about to be destroyed. The throne room had never felt so cold. Hundreds of candles burned against the towering stone walls, but their light did nothing to soften the tension, suffocating the chamber. Nobles lined both sides of the royal court in heavy silks and jeweled collars, whispering quietly behind gloved hands while royal guards stood motionless beside the massive black pillars. And at the very center of it all, Lyra stood alone. Her wrists were bound in silver restraints. The same hands that once healed injured servants and carried food through palace halls were now chained like a criminal's. The humiliation burned deeper than the metal ever could. But worse than the chains was the silence. No one defended her. Not a single voice. Not even his. At the far end of the chamber, the Alpha King sat upon the obsidian throne with one hand resting against the carved wolf head beside him. His expression was unreadable. Cold. Controlled. But Lyra noticed the tiny things no one else could. The tension in his jaw. The way his fingers curled slowly against the armrest. The faint pulse beating beneath the side of his neck. Kale was angry. No, not angry, conflicted, and somehow that terrified her more, because if even he looked uncertain, then this nightmare was already spiraling beyond control. A royal guard stepped forward first, bowing low before the throne. "My king," he announced loudly, his voice echoing through the chamber. The stolen documents were discovered inside the accused servants' quarters alongside poison matching the substance found in your ceremonial wine. Murmurs exploded across the court instantly. Disgusting. A human girl. She should be executed immediately. Lyra's breathing quickened. "No," she whispered shakily. "I didn't do this." But the room swallowed her voice whole. Lady Selene rose gracefully from her seat beside the council members, dressed in silver silk that shimmered beneath candlelight like frost. Calm, elegant, untouchable, exactly the image a future queen should present. And that made Lyra hate her instantly. Selene's eyes moved toward her slowly. Not with anger, not even hatred. Something worse. Victory. She had access to restricted corridors, Selene said softly. And servants reported suspicious behavior over the past several weeks. Lyra stared at her in disbelief. Suspicious behavior? The lies came so easily. She often disappeared late at night, Selene continued carefully. And several guards witnessed her near the Western Archives, shortly before the documents vanished. The court shifted again. More whispers, more judgment, more disgust. Every word tightened the invisible noose around Lyra's throat. Finally, she turned toward Cale, desperate, terrified, because surely he knew her better than this. Surely after everything, he would stop this. "My king," her voice cracked slightly, "you know I would never poison you." Silence. Cale didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation shattered something inside her. The entire room noticed it too. For one dangerous second, uncertainty crossed the Alpha King's face. He remembered every late-night conversation, every secret touch, every moment she looked at him without fear. And it showed. His jaw clenched hard, silver eyes fixed on her as though searching desperately for something hidden beneath the surface. Truth. A lie. Anything. But then another councilman stepped forward, quickly. "My king," the older noble said sharply, "hesitation will only encourage weakness. The alliance leaders already question palace security. If treason goes unpunished—" "I know what treason means," Cale interrupted coldly. The entire room immediately fell silent again. Even the councilman lowered his head, because despite everything, Cale was still the most dangerous creature in that kingdom. And when anger slipped into his voice, people listened. But Lyra saw something the others missed. Pain, buried beneath the fury, hidden so deeply most would never notice. Yet it was there, and for one brief moment, hope flickered inside her chest, until Selene stepped closer. "My king," she said gently, "sometimes betrayal hurts most when it comes from someone trusted." The words landed exactly how she intended, like poison. Cale's eyes darkened instantly. Lyra saw it happen in real time. The walls going back up, the king returning, emotion disappearing behind pride, and suddenly she understood something horrifying. He wanted to believe her, but he couldn't risk looking weak in front of the court. Not as king, not as alpha, not with an entire kingdom watching him. Which meant she was about to lose him. Cale rose from the throne slowly. The sound alone sent fear through the chamber. Heavy boots echoed across the stone floor as he descended the steps toward her. Closer, closer, until finally he stood directly in front of her. Lyra's heart pounded so violently she thought she might collapse. "Look at me," he ordered quietly. She obeyed instantly. Silver eyes locked onto hers, searching again, still searching, and for one impossible second, the entire world seemed to disappear around them. No court, no guards, no accusations. Just him. "Please," her eyes begged silently. "Please believe me." Cale inhaled slowly. His hand twitched once at his side, as if he wanted to reach for her. But instead, his expression hardened completely, like a door slamming shut. "You stand accused of treason against the crown," he said coldly. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. "No." "Poisoning the Alpha King," Cale continued, voice emotionless now. "Stealing restricted military documents and conspiring against the kingdom of Eldoria." Tears burned her eyes instantly. You know that isn't true. His jaw tightened harder, but he kept going. The punishment for treason is death. The courtroom erupted. Several nobles nodded approvingly, while others watched Lyra with open disgust. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. Death. Cale was condemning her to death. The same man who once held her gently beneath moonlight now stood before her like a stranger. Then suddenly, Cale stopped speaking. Silence stretched painfully between them, and Lyra noticed it again. That hesitation, that tiny fracture in his control. Because despite everything, he couldn't quite say the words, couldn't quite destroy her completely. Celine noticed too, which meant she moved quickly. "My king," she said softly. Mercy would be seen as weakness. Cale closed his eyes briefly. One breath, 2 breaths. Then finally, "The sentence has changed," he announced. Relief flooded Lyra, so fast it hurt, until his next words destroyed her anyway. "Lyra of House Ivran is hereby stripped of palace protection and banished permanently from Valdoria." The room fell silent again. Even the nobles looked shocked. Permanent banishment. For a human woman, alone beyond kingdom borders. It was practically a death sentence anyway. Lyra stared at him like she no longer recognized the man standing before her. Cale refused to look away, but she saw it. The guilt, the conflict, the misery hidden beneath all that ice. And somehow, that only made it worse. "Please," her voice broke completely now. "Cale!" Gasps rippled through the chamber at the use of his name. But she didn't care anymore. Tears streamed down her face as guards tightened their grip on her arms. "You know me," she whispered desperately. "You know I would never betray you." For the first time since entering the throne room, Cale looked shaken, truly shaken. His breathing slowed. His expression flickered. The king was slipping again. The man beneath him trying desperately to surface. And everyone saw it, which meant Cale saw it too. And the moment he realized the court was watching, everything changed. His face turned cold once more. Cruel, controlled, untouchable. "If you speak my name again," he said quietly, "I'll have you removed immediately." The words hit harder than any blade ever could. Something inside Lyra broke completely after that. Not because he banished her, not because the kingdom hated her, but because she finally understood the truth. He was choosing his crown over her, and he always would. Slowly, Lyra lifted trembling fingers toward the chain resting around her neck. Cale's eyes narrowed instantly, because he recognized it immediately. The moonstone necklace. His necklace. The one he secretly placed around her throat months ago beneath the palace gardens. The one he said marked her as protected by him. The symbol of everything they shared in secret. The entire court watched silently as Lyra removed it. Then came the ring. A simple silver band hidden beneath her sleeve. Cale went completely still. Only the two of them knew what it truly meant. Not an official mating bond. Not yet, but close enough to matter. Close enough to hurt. Lyra stared at both objects in her shaking hands for several seconds. Then finally, she dropped them at his feet. The sound echoed through the throne room like a gunshot. Cale flinched. Actually flinched. And for the first time all night, real pain crossed his face openly. Tiny. Brief. Gone almost instantly. But she saw it. So did Celine. So did the court. And suddenly the Alpha King looked more dangerous than ever. Because wounded monsters were the most terrifying kind. The guards began dragging Lyra backward toward the massive palace doors. She didn't fight anymore. Didn't cry. Didn't beg. She only kept staring at him. Waiting. Hoping. Praying he would stop this. One command. That was all it would take. One word from the king, and everything could still change. But Cale never spoke. And as the palace doors slowly opened behind her, cold rain and thunder crashing through the darkened courtyard, Lyra looked at him one last time, and realized he never trusted her at all. The storm outside Valdoria lasted 3 days. 3 days of freezing rain. 3 days of violent winds tearing through the northern forests beyond the kingdom walls. And somewhere inside that endless darkness, Lyra walked alone. At first, anger kept her moving. The humiliation replayed endlessly in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. The whispers, the chains around her wrists, the sound of her necklace hitting the throne room floor. Worst of all, Cale's silence. Every step through the mud, felt heavier because of it. Because part of her still couldn't understand how the man who once looked at her like she mattered had stood there and watched her world collapse without stopping it. The forest swallowed her quickly after nightfall. Towering black trees stretched endlessly beneath storm clouds, while wolves howled somewhere deep in the mountains. Rain soaked through her thin clothes until her skin turned numb from cold. Still, she kept walking. Because there was nowhere else to go. No family waiting for her. No village willing to protect a banished servant accused of treason against the Alpha King himself. In Valdoria, exile was worse than execution. Execution was mercy. Exile meant suffering first. By the second night, Lyra could barely feel her feet. Branches cut against her skin as she stumbled through snow-covered hills, clutching her torn cloak tightly around herself while hunger twisted painfully inside her stomach. She hadn't eaten since the palace. Not really. Every small village she passed closed their doors the moment they recognized the royal exile markings burned into the edge of her cloak. Fear followed the Alpha King's name everywhere. Even out here, one elderly woman secretly slipped her a piece of bread near dawn. But when the woman's husband noticed, he dragged her back inside immediately. "Don't get involved," he hissed fearfully before slamming the door shut. Lyra stood there silently in the snow afterward, holding the small piece of bread in trembling hands, completely alone, and for the first time since leaving the kingdom. She cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears slipping down frozen cheeks while snow fell endlessly around her. Because she finally understood something terrifying. No one was coming for her, not even him. Days blurred together after that. Cold mornings, long roads, empty stomach, fear. Sometimes she slept beneath abandoned wagons. Other nights inside caves barely warm enough to survive. Once, she woke to growling wolves circling the edge of the forest darkness while she held a broken branch like it could somehow protect her. The world beyond palace walls was cruel, crueler than she remembered, and slowly, Lyra began disappearing inside herself. The bright warmth people once loved about her faded more each day beneath exhaustion and heartbreak, until eventually even walking became difficult. It started with dizziness, then nausea. At first she blamed hunger, stress, cold, but the sickness kept getting worse. One morning, she collapsed beside a frozen river before sunrise, vomiting violently into the snow while her entire body trembled uncontrollably. Fear crept into her chest immediately. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Still, she forced herself forward, because survival no longer gave her choices. By the seventh day, Lyra reached a tiny village hidden deep within the southern valleys, near the borderlands. The place barely looked real. Small wooden cottages surrounded by smoke and snow, flickering lanterns glowing softly through heavy fog. It felt quieter than the kingdom, safer somehow, but Lyra barely noticed any of it, because the second she stepped into the village square, her legs gave out beneath her completely. Darkness swallowed her instantly, and somewhere far away, voices shouted in panic. "She's freezing! Get her inside! She's barely breathing!" Then nothing. When Lyra finally woke again, everything smelled like herbs and firewood. Soft candlelight flickered across a small wooden ceiling overhead while snow tapped quietly against nearby windows. For several seconds, confusion clouded her mind. Then pain returned all at once. Her body ached everywhere. A chair creaked softly nearby. "You're awake!" Lyra turned slowly toward the voice. An elderly woman sat beside the fireplace wrapped in thick wool blankets, carefully grinding herbs between wrinkled fingers. Her silver hair was braided tightly behind her head, and sharp green eyes studied Lyra carefully from across the room. "You collapsed outside my home," the woman explained calmly. "Another hour in that storm and you would have died." Lyra tried sitting up immediately. Pain shot through her stomach hard enough to make her gasp. The old healer noticed instantly. Her expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Slowly, the woman stood and approached the bed. "How long have you been feeling sick?" she asked quietly. Lyra hesitated. "A few days." The healer didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached gently for Lyra's wrist, closed her eyes briefly, and suddenly the room felt unbearably quiet. "What is it?" Lyra whispered nervously. The old woman opened her eyes slowly. Then came the words that shattered everything. "You're with child." Silence. Complete silence. Lyra stared at her blankly. "No." The healer's expression softened slightly. "You're pregnant." The world stopped. Her breathing became uneven instantly as memories crashed violently through her mind. Late nights in Cale's chambers, his hands against her skin, the way he held her like she belonged to him. Tears burned her eyes before she could stop them. "No," she whispered again, this time breaking completely. The healer moved closer gently. "Child." But Lyra suddenly covered her mouth as sobs escaped her uncontrollably. Not because she was afraid, not because she regretted the baby, but because the reality hit her all at once. Her child would grow up alone, without a father, without protection, without a home. And worst of all, Cale would never even know. The grief that tore through her then was unlike anything she had ever felt before. Because despite everything, some part of her still loved him. And now that love had become something permanent, something living, something breathing inside her. The healer stayed silent while Lyra cried. Outside, snow continued falling softly across the tiny village while distant wolves echoed through the mountains beyond. And far away inside the kingdom of Valdoria, the Alpha King was beginning to unravel. The palace had changed after Lyra's exile. No music filled the banquet halls anymore. No laughter echoed through servant corridors. Even the castle itself seemed colder now, darker, because Cale had become impossible to be around. Servants trembled whenever he entered rooms. Council meetings ended in shouting. 3 guards were nearly executed after failing a border inspection. One nobleman left the throne room shaking so badly he could barely stand after questioning a royal order publicly. The Alpha King's temper had become vicious, unpredictable, violent, and everyone knew why. Even if no one dared say her name aloud, Cale barely slept anymore. Most nights, he wandered palace halls alone long after midnight while storms hammered against the windows outside. Other nights, he sat silently inside his war chamber staring at reports without actually reading them. Because every thought somehow led back to her. The way she looked standing in chains. The tears in her eyes. The sound of her voice begging him to believe her. It haunted him. Worse, doubt had started creeping in. Tiny cracks at first. Easy to ignore. Until they weren't. It began with one servant girl. She approached Captain Reese quietly during kitchen inventory inspections. "And no one searched Lady Celine's wing," she whispered nervously. Reese frowned instantly. "What?" The servant immediately panicked. "Forget I said anything." But suspicion had already planted itself. Then came another inconsistency. The poison vial discovered in Lyra's room contained fingerprints from a palace guard recently transferred under Celine's authority. Another servant admitted military archive keys had briefly disappeared days before the theft. Whispers spread slowly through the castle after that. Quiet, dangerous whispers. And eventually, those whispers reached Cale. The Alpha King listened silently while Captain Reese explained the inconsistencies inside the war chamber late one evening. Candlelight flickered violently across Cale's face as the captain finished speaking. The room became deathly still. "You're telling me," Cale said slowly, "the evidence may have been planted?" Reese hesitated. "My king, I believe we should reopen the investigation." Cale didn't move, didn't speak. For several terrifying seconds, the chamber felt frozen in time. Then suddenly, crash! Cale slammed the entire war table sideways across the room. Maps scattered everywhere. Candles shattered against stone floors. Reese stepped back instantly. But what terrified him most wasn't the king's rage. It was the expression on his face afterward. Because Cale didn't look furious. He looked horrified, as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. "No," he whispered. And in that moment, the Alpha King realized the truth. Lyra had been innocent. The girl he claimed to protect, the woman he secretly loved, had begged him to trust her. And he destroyed her anyway. Publicly. Cruelly. Irreversibly. Cale staggered backward slightly, one hand bracing against the edge of the wall as memories crashed through him violently. Her tears. Her shaking voice. The way she looked at him before the gates closed behind her. Disbelief. Heartbreak. Betrayal. And suddenly none of it felt survivable anymore. Because she was gone now. alone somewhere beyond the kingdom, maybe starving, maybe dead already. And it was his fault, not the court's, not Celine's, his. Cale inhaled sharply as panic finally entered his chest for the first time in years. Real panic, because no amount of power could undo what he'd done. And deep down, he feared he would never see her again. Without another word, Cale stormed from the chamber. Guards scrambled out of his path as he moved quickly through palace corridors until finally he reached the servant wing she once occupied. Lyra's room remained untouched since her exile. The sight of it nearly destroyed him. Her books still rested beside the bed. A half-finished piece of embroidery sat abandoned near the window. One of her hair ribbons remained hanging beside the mirror. Small pieces of her everywhere, like she had simply disappeared in the middle of living. Cale stepped inside slowly. The room still smelled faintly like her, and somehow that hurt most of all. His eyes scanned everything desperately now, searching, thinking, trying to understand. Then suddenly, he froze. A small basket hidden near her bedside contained dried herbs. Medicinal herbs. Cale frowned slightly. He recognized them immediately. Nausea remedies. Fatigue treatments. Used most often for. His breath caught. Nearby sat a stained cloth. Fresh sickness marks. Several of them. Weeks old. Cale slowly looked around the room again. And for the first time since Lyra's exile, true fear entered his eyes. The royal physician did not speak immediately. That was what frightened Cale the most. The old man stood near the massive arched windows of the healing chamber, hands trembling faintly behind his back, while rain battered the castle walls outside. Torches hissed in the cold draft crawling through the stone corridors. Somewhere beyond the chamber doors, servants whispered in nervous clusters. No one dared breathe too loudly around the Alpha King anymore. Not after she disappeared. Cale stood at the center of the room like a carved monument of war itself. Massive, still unreadable. But his eyes had not slept in days. "Speak," he said quietly. The physician swallowed, not because of fear alone, because he understood that whatever came next would change the kingdom forever. "My king." The old man hesitated again. Cale's jaw tightened. The silence stretched, long enough for thunder to crack across the mountains outside. Then finally, when Lady Lyra collapsed before leaving the palace, I examined her. Cale's expression didn't move, but something invisible shifted beneath the surface. The physician lowered his gaze. She showed signs consistent with early pregnancy. The room went completely still. Even the rain outside suddenly felt distant. Cale blinked once, as if the words had failed to reach him properly. "Repeat that." The physician's voice nearly broke. "Nausea." A pause. Fainting. Another pause. Changes in pulse, temperature, scent. He inhaled shakily. "She was carrying your child." Silence. Heavy, violent, endless. Cale did not move. The Alpha King who had stood before armies without fear, the man who had executed traitors without hesitation, the ruler who terrified entire kingdoms with a single command, froze. Not outwardly. Outwardly, he remained stone. But inside something cracked. And for the first time in years, fear entered him. Real fear. Not fear of war, not fear of death. Fear of loss. His child. Lyra had left carrying his child. A sudden flash tore through his mind. Her trembling hands, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the mornings she could barely stand, the way she avoided meals, the way she held her stomach when she thought nobody was looking. And worst of all, the memory of himself turning away from her. Again, and again, and again. Cale slowly lowered himself into the chair behind him. Not like a king. Like a man whose body had suddenly become too heavy to carry. The physician had never seen him look small before. Never. She knew. Cale asked quietly. The physician hesitated. "Yes." That single word landed harder than any blade ever had. Cale looked down at his hands. The same hands that had built empires, now trembling almost imperceptibly against the dark wood. "She left alone," he murmured. Not to the physician. To himself. His mate had walked into the unknown, carrying their unborn child, believing she had no place beside him. The realization hollowed him from the inside out. And suddenly, everything changed. This was no longer about pride. No longer about betrayal. No longer about punishing a runaway Luna. Now, it was survival. Because if Lyra crossed beyond the kingdom borders, if another territory claimed sanctuary over her, if the child was born outside Alpha jurisdiction, then according to ancient blood law, the heir may never return. Cale's eyes slowly lifted, and for the first time, the physicians saw panic inside them. Pure panic. The Alpha King rose abruptly. The chair slammed backward across the stone floor. "Prepare the horses!" Servants outside the chamber jolted. "Seal every eastern gate." His voice was growing harsher now, more unstable. "Send scouts to every border village." "My king!" "Now!" The roar shook the walls. Torches flickered violently. Within minutes, the castle exploded into motion. Soldiers flooded corridors. Messengers sprinted through courtyards. War riders prepared beneath storm-dark skies. But Cale barely saw any of it. His mind was trapped somewhere else. With her. Alone, cold, pregnant, and afraid. The search began before dawn. Cale rode at the front himself, not as a ruler commanding from safety, as a desperate mate hunting the only person he could no longer live without. Rain lashed across the forests as the royal riders crossed muddy trails deep into the outer villages. Horses thundered through river crossings and mountain paths, while villagers rushed from their homes at the sight of black royal banners. Every stop carried the same fragile hope. Every stop destroyed him a little more. A stable keeper in the northern valley squinted at Lyra's portrait beneath lantern light. "Yes!" Cale leaned forward instantly. "She was here." The old man nodded slowly. A young woman. Hooded cloak. Exhausted. Cale's pulse slammed violently. "When?" The answer came like a knife. "Yesterday morning." Yesterday. Too late again. Cale turned sharply, mounting his horse before the man even finished speaking. "Move!" And they rode again. Harder this time. Faster. As though speed alone could undo the damage he had caused. Days passed. Then another. Then another. The mighty Alpha King crossed territories he had not entered in years. Dense forests swallowed entire roads beneath black trees. Freezing rain soaked through armor and skin. Villages blurred together beneath exhaustion and fury. Yet every clue led only to absence. She passed through 2 nights ago. A pregnant woman stopped here asking for work. She traded jewelry for food. She looked sick. She kept traveling east. East. Always east. Always one step ahead. And with every near miss, Cale unraveled further. Sleep abandoned him completely. His temper became lethal. One scout returned empty-handed near the border camps. Cale grabbed the man by the throat before anyone could react. "You lost her." "My king, I searched everywhere." "You were ordered to find her." The soldier's boots left the ground. The other warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Because this was no longer the cold, controlled Alpha they knew. This was a man drowning. Slowly, violently, and somewhere beneath all the rage was guilt. Crushing guilt. Because every road Lyra traveled alone, every freezing night she endured, every moment their unborn child suffered, had started inside his palace, inside his silence, inside his failure. One evening, Cale arrived at a tiny village near the western border just as snow began falling across the rooftops. The innkeeper recognized her immediately. "Yes," the woman whispered. Cale stepped forward, so fast the chair behind him crashed over. "She stayed here." The innkeeper nodded nervously. She was very weak, could barely stand. Cale's chest tightened. "Where is she now?" The woman looked toward the distant road, disappearing into white snowfall. "She left this morning." Morning. Again. Again too late. Cale closed his eyes briefly, and for one dangerous second, the mighty Alpha King looked completely broken. The innkeeper hesitated before speaking again. She talked about finding work near the coast. Cale's eyes snapped open. The coast. If Lyra reached the ports, she could disappear forever. A cold wave of terror moved through him, so sharply it nearly stopped his breathing. Without another word, he turned and stormed back into the snow. The soldiers hurried after him, but none dared speak, because they could all see it now. The untouchable Alpha King was falling apart, and somewhere out there, his mate still believed he was the monster chasing her, not the man desperately trying to save what remained of his heart. Winter arrived early that year. Snow buried the northern roads beneath endless white silence, while brutal winds swept across forgotten villages at the edge of the kingdom. Entire forests disappeared beneath frost-covered shadows. Rivers hardened into glass. Chimneys exhaled smoke into pale gray skies that never seemed to brighten anymore. And still, Kale searched. Months had passed since Lyra vanished. Months. The kingdom barely recognized its Alpha King now. The once immaculate ruler looked worn down by obsession itself. Dark exhaustion hollowed beneath his eyes. His beard had grown rough and uneven. His royal cloak remained dusted with old snow and dried mud from roads that never ended. He no longer traveled with armies. Only a few riders remained beside him now. The others had stopped trying to convince him to return home weeks ago, because Kale no longer cared about the throne. Only her. Every village carried the same ghosts. A woman traveling alone, dark hair, quiet-voiced, an infant wrapped beneath winter blankets. Always close enough to destroy him, never close enough to reach, until finally, on the edge of a small mountain village, hidden beneath snowfall, Kale heard the words he had been dying for. Yes, the old shopkeeper whispered cautiously. She lives here. Kale froze. The air left his lungs slowly. She came before the first heavy storm. Rents the little cottage near the forest edge. The man pointed through falling snow. There. Kale turned and saw it. A tiny cottage standing alone beneath white-covered pines. Smoke drifted softly from the chimney. A single lantern glowed behind frosted windows. Small, fragile, alive. For a moment, the mighty Alpha King could not move. After months of endless searching, after crossing forests, borders, frozen rivers, after losing pieces of himself with every dead end, she was finally there. So close. His horse shifted restlessly beneath him, steam curling into the frozen air. But Kale remained completely still, because suddenly, fear returned. Not fear of battle, not fear of rejection. Something worse. What if she looked at him with nothing left? What if he had already destroyed every part of her that once loved him? The thought hit harder than any sword ever could. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he slowly approached the cottage. One step, then another. The wind howled softly through the trees, and somewhere inside, a baby cried. Kale stopped breathing. The sound was small, fragile, new. His child. For one impossible second, emotion nearly brought him to his knees. He stood outside the door for what felt like forever. Unable to knock, unable to prepare himself for what waited on the other side. Then finally, his trembling hand lifted. 3 soft knocks echoed against the wood. Silence followed. Movement inside. Slow footsteps. And then, the door opened. Everything stopped. Lyra stood there holding an infant against her chest. The world went silent. No music. No dramatic swell. Only wind moving through trees. Breathing. The faint crackle of fire from inside the cottage. And the soft crying of the baby bundled in her arms. Kale stared at her like a dying man, seeing light for the first time. She looked different. Not weaker. Not broken. Stronger. Her face had softened with motherhood, but her eyes were no longer the frightened eyes of the girl who left the palace. Those eyes had survived winter, survived loneliness, survived him. A thick wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while the infant rested safely against her chest. One protective hand covered the baby instinctively the moment she saw Kale standing there. That movement shattered him, because it was automatic. Protect the child first. From anything. Even him. Kale opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 4 months he had imagined this moment, rehearsed thousands of speeches, apologies, explanations, begging. But standing in front of her now, words became useless. Lyra's expression barely moved, but her grip on the child tightened. Kale noticed immediately, and hated himself for noticing. Snow drifted between them in slow silence. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Only the baby's soft cries filled the frozen air. Kale's eyes slowly lowered toward the infant, so small, wrapped carefully in faded cloth. His chest physically hurt looking at them. Their child, his son or daughter, had been born without him there. First breath, first cry, first heartbeat outside the womb. Missed. All missed. Because he failed her. Kale swallowed hard. Lyra! His voice cracked. Just once. But she heard it. And somehow that made everything worse. Because she remembered when his voice used to soften only for her. Now it sounded like a stranger breaking apart. You found us, she said quietly. Not warmly, not coldly either. Just tired. Kale took a slow step forward. I never stopped looking. A flicker crossed her face. Pain. Anger. Something dangerously close to heartbreak. Months, she whispered. The single word carried unimaginable weight. Months of fear. Months of surviving alone. Months of giving birth without him. Kale felt every second of it slam into him all at once. I know. No, Lyra said softly. Her eyes finally lifted fully to his. You don't. Silence again. Heavy, sharp, breathing between wounds that never healed properly. Kale looked at her like he wanted to memorize every part of her all over again. The pinkness in her cheeks from the cold, the exhaustion hidden beneath her strength, the tiny protective sway she used unconsciously to soothe the infant. She had become a mother, and somehow that realization made the distance between them feel even greater. I came to bring you home, Kale said carefully. Lyra let out a quiet laugh. Not amused. Broken. Home. That word almost destroyed her. Her eyes glistened instantly. You mean the place where I learned how invisible I was? Kale flinched. Actually flinched. I was wrong. You were cruel. The words hit harder. Because they were true. Kale lowered his gaze briefly. Snow continued falling around them. I know. No, she repeated again. This time stronger. You know now. The baby whimpered softly in her arms. Lyra immediately looked down, gently soothing the child against her chest before looking back at Kale. And that was when he fully understood. He was no longer the center of her world. This child was. And for the first time in his life, Kale realized love could exist without him. The thought terrified him. You don't get to come back, she whispered, voice shaking now. Because you finally regret it. Kale closed his eyes briefly. Every word carved deeper. You don't get to disappear emotionally for months, make me feel unwanted, make me survive alone. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks. And then arrive here pretending love fixes everything. Kale looked completely shattered now. Not angry, not defensive. Destroyed. Because she was right. Every single word. The wind moved violently between them while the infant began crying softly again. Kale instinctively stepped forward, then stopped, his eyes lowered to the baby. Slowly, carefully, he lifted one trembling hand slightly, as though wanting to touch the child, wanting to know they were real. But halfway there, he froze. Fear entered his expression again. Deep, raw, unbearably human. Because suddenly the mighty Alpha King did not know if he even deserved to touch his own child. His hand slowly lowered, and Lyra saw it, saw the hesitation, the guilt, the terror. For a brief moment, something inside her cracked too. The baby stirred again beneath the blanket. A tiny sound escaped them. Then slowly, the infant opened their eyes. Gold. Bright gold. The air itself seemed to still. Kale stared in complete disbelief. Ancient Alpha blood. His heir. There could be no mistake. The child's glowing golden eyes reflected directly back at him. And in that single moment, Kale realized two devastating truths at once. He had finally found his family, and he still might lose them forever. The storm did not end that night. Snow continued falling over the tiny village long after Kale saw the golden eyes of his child for the very first time. Wind scraped against the cottage walls, while frost crept slowly across the windows. Inside, nothing felt the same anymore. Because now the truth existed between them in physical form. Small, fragile, breathing softly in Lyra's arms. Their child, and Kale could not stop staring. Not with pride, not even with joy, with devastation. Because every tiny detail reminded him of what he had lost. The infant's dark hair, the warmth of their little body wrapped against Lyra's chest, the way they quieted instantly when she whispered softly to them. She had done all of this alone. Every sleepless night, every moment of fear, every pain. Alone. Kale stood frozen near the doorway while snow melted slowly from his boots onto the wooden floorboards. And for the first time in his entire life, the Alpha King looked unsure of where he belonged. Lyra noticed, but she said nothing. The silence between them was no longer violent. Now it was careful, fragile, like two wounded people standing barefoot on shattered glass, trying not to cut each other deeper. The fire crackled softly nearby. The baby stirred again. Kale's eyes followed every movement unconsciously. Lyra finally adjusted the blanket around the infant before speaking quietly. You should leave before the roads freeze completely. The words hit immediately, not because they were cruel, because they were honest. Cale swallowed hard. I'm not leaving. Lyra's eyes lifted slowly toward him. You don't get to decide that. I know. His answer came instantly this time. No pride, no authority. Just truth. I know I don't deserve anything from you. Lyra looked away first, because hearing him say it hurt more than anger ever had. Cale slowly removed the heavy black cloak from his shoulders and placed it carefully near the door. No royal insignia, no crown, no armor of status. Just a man standing in the warmth of a tiny cottage, trying desperately not to lose the only thing that mattered anymore. I'll stay somewhere else in the village, he said quietly. I only need to know you're safe. Lyra said nothing, but her fingers tightened slightly around the baby. Cale noticed that too, and without another word, he stepped back outside into the storm. The villagers did not know what to make of him. At first, fear followed wherever he walked. Even without royal armor, Cale carried danger in the way he moved. Massive shoulders, sharp eyes, the quiet intensity of a predator built for war. But days passed, then more, and slowly, the village began seeing something else. Every morning before sunrise, Cale chopped wood beside the frozen supply sheds while snow gathered across his shoulders. His axe split through thick logs with brutal precision, breath clouding heavily in the freezing air. By afternoon, he repaired broken fences buried beneath ice. At night, he patrolled the outer forest where wolves had begun moving closer because of winter starvation. Not once did he ask for recognition. Not once did he command anyone. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the Alpha King carried water buckets through snow like an ordinary laborer. And every single night, he slept outside Lyra's cottage. Not inside, outside. The first night, he sat against the wooden porch beneath brutal winds, cloak wrapped tightly around him while frost gathered along his dark hair. The second night, villagers offered shelter. He refused. The third night, Lyra opened the door briefly after midnight and found him asleep against the porch railing, snow covering his shoulders entirely. For several long seconds, she simply stared at him, the mighty Alpha King, shivering in silence outside her home because he refused to force his way back into her life. Something painful moved inside her chest. She closed the door again quickly before he woke. But sleep did not come easily after that. Days slowly became routines, and routines slowly became something more dangerous. Hope. Cale never pushed her, never demanded forgiveness. He simply stayed, quietly, patiently. The baby became the center of everything. At first, Lyra never allowed Cale too close. Whenever he entered the cottage, her body instinctively shifted protectively toward the child. Cale noticed every single time, and accepted it every single time. That hurt her more than arguments would have, because she kept waiting for the old Cale to return. The cold king, the prideful alpha, the man who wounded with silence. But instead, she kept finding softness where cruelty used to live. One evening, the baby began crying uncontrollably during a harsh snowstorm. Lyra walked the floor exhausted, whispering softly while trying to soothe them. Nothing worked. The infant cried harder. Her own eyes began filling with frustrated tears from exhaustion. Then quietly, Cale spoke from the corner near the fireplace. May I try? Lyra hesitated immediately. The pause itself nearly destroyed him. But after a long moment, she slowly handed him the child. Cale took the baby like he was holding something sacred, terrified to do it wrong. The infant looked impossibly small against his massive arms. For several awkward seconds, Cale simply stood there frozen. Then softly, very softly, he began humming. Lyra blinked in surprise. It was an old northern lullaby, ancient, gentle. A song alpha mothers once used during winters centuries ago. The baby slowly quieted, then stopped crying completely. Cale looked down in stunned disbelief as tiny fingers wrapped instinctively around one of his own. And something inside him broke all over again. Lyra watched silently from across the room, because she had never seen this version of him before. Not the king, not the monster people feared, just a father, and somehow that frightened her almost as much as loving him once did. Weeks passed, Trust did not magically heal. Some wounds still opened too easily. Sometimes Lyra caught herself remembering the palace, remembering loneliness, remembering how invisible she once felt beside him. And when those memories surfaced, distance returned immediately. Cale never fought her over it. That was new too. One night during dinner, silence stretched heavily between them while snow battered the windows outside. Finally Lyra asked quietly, "Why now?" Cale looked up. "You had years to care." The words weren't cruel, just tired. Cale set down his cup slowly. "I thought love meant possession." His voice remained low. "Protection, control, providing." A long pause followed. "But I never learned how to make someone feel seen." Lyra's eyes lowered slightly. Cale stared into the fire. "And by the time I realized it," his voice roughened, "you were already gone." The baby stirred softly nearby. Neither spoke again for a while. But something shifted that night. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just understanding. And sometimes, understanding is more dangerous than hatred. Because hatred keeps distance alive. Understanding invites feelings back in. Far away from the snowy village, inside the royal palace, someone else finally learned the truth. The royal advisor stood beside the throne room fireplace while a trembling messenger knelt before him. "You're certain?" "Yes, my lord." The messenger lowered his head further. "The former Luna survived." The advisor's expression darkened instantly. "And the child?" A pause. Then, "The child carries alpha blood." Silence swallowed the chamber. Slowly, the advisor's hand tightened around the crystal goblet beside him. Crack! The glass shattered violently in his grip. Because this changed everything. The heir lived, which meant his control over the throne would eventually end. Unless, his eyes slowly lifted toward the storm outside the palace windows. Cold calculation replaced shock almost immediately. How many guards remain with the king? Very few. The advisor smiled faintly. Cruel, thin, deadly. Good. The assassins departed before dawn. 6 riders dressed entirely in black. No banners, no royal markings. Only weapons hidden beneath heavy winter cloaks. Their horses vanished into the blizzard heading north. Toward the village. Toward Lyra. Toward the child. That night, the storm became violent. Wind screamed through the forest while villagers locked their doors against the freezing dark. Snow buried rooftops beneath thick white layers as lanterns flickered weakly against the cold. Inside the cottage, the fire burned low. Lyra slept lightly near the baby's cradle. And outside, Cale's eyes suddenly opened. Instantly alert, the warrior instincts inside him snapped awake before his mind fully caught up. Then he heard it. Low growling. Wolves. Not hunting cries. Warning cries. Cale rose immediately from the porch, snow crunching beneath his boots as his hand moved toward the blade at his side. The growling deepened within the trees. Then horses emerged through the storm. Dark riders. 6 of them, moving silently between the falling snow. Cale's expression changed instantly. Not fear. Something colder. Lethal. The riders slowed as they approached the cottage. And from inside the house, the baby began crying. Wrong move. Very wrong move. Because the second that sound reached Cale's ears, the Alpha King returned. Not the broken man. Not the grieving mate. The monster kingdoms once feared. Slowly, Cale stepped forward into the snowfall, eyes glowing dangerously gold in the darkness. The wind howled around him violently. One assassin reached for his weapon. Cale's voice cut through the storm like death itself. Cale rose immediately from the porch, snow crunching beneath his boots as his hand moved toward the blade at his side. The growling deepened within the trees. Then horses emerged through the storm. Dark riders. 6 of them, moving silently between the falling snow. Cale's expression changed instantly. Not fear. Something colder. Lethal. The riders slowed as they approached the cottage. And from inside the house, the baby began crying. Wrong move. Very wrong move. Because the second that sound reached Cale's ears, the Alpha King returned. Not the broken man. Not the grieving mate. The monster kingdoms once feared. Slowly, Cale stepped forward into the snowfall, eyes glowing dangerously gold in the darkness. The wind howled around him violently. One assassin reached for his weapon. Cale's voice cut through the storm like death itself. No one touches my mate again. And then, The wolves surrounding the forest began growling too.